The wind across the high desert of Fort Irwin was not a force of nature. It was a form of malice. It was a tireless artist that used sand as its medium, sculpting the landscape and scouring the souls of the men who chose to inhabit it. It found its way through every seal, under every door, and into every pore, leaving a fine, gritty film on teeth and a permanent rasp in the throat. Inside the long, corrugated metal building that served as the primary classroom for the United States Marine Corps Advanced Sniper Course, the air was a stale cocktail of CLP gun oil, sweat, and the faint, metallic tang of institutional coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed a weary, monotonous tune from the ceiling, casting a sterile, unforgiving glare on the 24 students arranged in neat, uncomfortable rows. They were the best marksmen their respective units could offer, apex predators from the infantry world, each one a bundle of coiled confidence and barely suppressed aggression. They laughed too loud and moved with the declarative certainty of men who believed, with every fiber of their being, that they were the sharpest instruments in the shed. And then there was Sergeant Ava Rostova. She sat in the last row, in the corner furthest from the door, a position of tactical observation that seemed as natural to her as breathing. She was an island of stillness in an ocean of restless machismo. While the others swapped stories and sharpened their bravado, she was disassembling the bolt of her M40A6 rifle with the detached precision of a watchmaker. Her movements were economical, fluid, and utterly silent. There was no wasted motion, no flourish, no hint of ego in the task. It was simply a process, a communion between the operator and her tool. She did not look up, she did not participate, she did not exist in their world. To them, she was an anomaly, a clerical error that had somehow been issued a rifle and a set of camouflage utilities. Her appearance did nothing to dissuade this assumption. She was not large or physically imposing. Her frame was lean, her features plain and unmemorable, framed by brown hair pulled back into a severe regulation bun. There were no sharp angles to her face, no scars telling tales of past glories, no fire in her eyes. Her gaze, when she did lift it, was a calm, neutral gray, the color of a placid sea before a storm. She wore her uniform as if it were a disguise, a set of borrowed clothes that allowed her to move through this world without attracting notice. She was the quiet professional, personified to such a degree that she became almost invisible, a ghost haunting the periphery of their vision. They saw her, but they did not register her. She was background noise, a detail to be dismissed. The door to the classroom slammed open, striking the wall with a percussive bang that was both an entrance and a declaration of war. Gunnery Sergeant Rex Thorne stood framed in the doorway, and the room's boisterous energy evaporated, replaced by a sudden, tense silence. Thorne was not a man. He was a monument to the old Corps. His face looked like it had been carved from naval tradition itself, a craggy landscape of wrinkles, scars, and a jawline that could have been used to moor a destroyer. His digital desert Marpat uniform was starched to the consistency of sheet metal, and the eagle, globe, and anchor tattooed on his forearm was faded and stretched, a testament to decades spent in service to the institution he worshipped. He was the lead instructor, the gatekeeper, the embodiment of the sniper school's brutal ethos. Authority radiated from him like heat from a furnace, and his eyes, small and hard like ball bearings, swept the room with an expression of profound disappointment. "My house," he growled, his voice a low rumble of gravel and discontent. He strode to the front of the room, his boots striking the concrete floor with heavy, rhythmic thuds. "My rules. For the next 10 weeks, You will eat, sleep, and breathe long-range precision marksmanship. You will forget your names. You will forget your wives and your girlfriends. You will forget every bad habit some half-wit platoon sergeant taught you back in the grunts. You are here to be unmade. You are here to be remade in my image. You are here to become ghosts, phantoms, angels of death who deliver judgment from 1,000 meters away. Is that understood? A ragged chorus of "Yes, gunnery sergeant" filled the room. Thorne's gaze continued its sweep, and then it landed on Sergeant Rostova. It stopped. For a long moment he just stared, his expression shifting from general disapproval to focused, specific disbelief. A slow, condescending smirk spread across his lips. He walked down the aisle, his presence a wave of intimidation that washed over the other students, who studiously avoided his gaze. He stopped directly in front of her desk. She did not flinch. She did not look up. She continued to meticulously wipe down the firing pin of her bolt with a small, oiled cloth. He watched her for a full 30 seconds, letting the silence stretch and thicken, turning it into a weapon. The other Marines watched, a mix of apprehension and cruel anticipation on their faces. They knew what was coming. The tyrant had found his first target. "Well, well, well," Thorne said, his voice dripping with theatrical contempt. "What do we have here? Did the S1 shop get lost on the way to the chow hall?" Rostova finished her task, carefully placing the firing pin on the cleaning mat. Only then did she lift her head, her calm gray eyes meeting his. She said nothing. Her silence was not submissive. It was absolute. It was a wall, and his arrogance bounced right off it. Her lack of a flustered response seemed to fuel his disdain. This was not the reaction he was accustomed to. He expected fear, or at least nervous deference. He received only placid neutrality. "I'm talking to you, Sergeant," he snapped. "You got a name, or did they just issue you a serial number?" "Sergeant Rostova, gunnery sergeant," she replied, her voice steady and low, without a trace of inflection. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with the emotional content of a weather report. "Rostova," he repeated, tasting the name and finding it wanting. "You think you have what it takes to be here? You think you can stalk for 3 days through mud and filth, living on nothing but hate and water? You think you can hold your breath, slow your own heart, and squeeze a trigger to send a 175-grain piece of copper and lead through a man's skull from a click-out, and then feel absolutely nothing? Look at me when I'm talking to you." Her eyes had never left his. This quiet defiance enraged him. He saw it as a challenge to the natural order of his universe. In his world, snipers were a specific breed of man, forged in a crucible of aggression and primal instinct. They were hunters, killers. She was an administrator, a clerk, an affront to the sacred traditions of his brotherhood. "This is a holy place, Sergeant." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, menacing whisper that carried to every corner of the silent room. "This is where we forge the tip of the spear. This isn't a social experiment. This isn't a place to check a box on your resume. This is the goddamned Valhalla of long-range death. And you don't belong here." He expected a protest, an argument, tears. Anything but the unnerving calm she continued to project. She seemed to be observing him as one might observe a curious but predictable weather phenomenon. It was like a lioness allowing a jackal to dance and yap at the very edge of its kill radius. knowing that the confrontation was utterly meaningless. "Understood, Gunnery Sergeant," she said again, her voice betraying nothing. The repetition of that phrase, delivered in that same flat tone, was the final spark. Thorne's face flushed a deep, mottled red. His professionalism, already a thin veneer, cracked completely. He reached down and swept his hand across her desk, sending the meticulously arranged components of her rifle bolt clattering to the dusty floor. The small metal parts scattered like metallic insects. "No!" he roared, his voice cracking with fury. "You do not understand. You are a guest in the house of men who do violence for a living, and you are not welcome. Get on your hands and knees and pick up your mess. Then pack your bags. You're done here. I am personally removing you from my course." The other students stared, frozen. The line had been crossed. This was no longer training. It was a pure, ugly display of personal animus. But Rostova's expression did not change. She did not look at the scattered parts on the floor. She simply held Thorne's furious gaze for another beat, then gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a nod of submission. It was a nod of acknowledgement, of acceptance. As if this outcome was not only expected, but was, on some level, a necessary part of a much larger, unseen process. She stood slowly, her movements still graceful and deliberate. She did not look down at the floor. She did not look at the gloating face of Gunnery Sergeant Thorne. She looked past him, toward the door, as if he were already a part of her past. She took one step to move around him, and at that exact moment, the world ended. A klaxon began to scream, a piercing, two-toned wail that signified a real-world, base-wide emergency. Red lights strobed along the ceiling, bathing the room in frantic, pulsing washes of crimson. The sound was a physical thing, a punch to the gut that instantly dissolved Thorne's manufactured drama. His face went from red with rage to pale with shock. Every Marine in the room was on their feet, their training kicking in, their eyes wide and searching for information. Over the base-wide intercom, a voice, tight with panic, crackled to life. Code Zulu, real world. I repeat, this is not a drill. Hostile forces detected, Sector 4. Base is under imminent threat. All personnel to battle stations. Code Zulu. It was a designation so severe, so unthinkable, that most of them had only ever read about it in manuals. It meant an active, sophisticated attack on the installation itself. Thorne, his personal vendetta instantly forgotten, began to do what he was trained to do. He started shouting orders. "You heard him! Move! Grab your rifles! Grab your gear! Sergeants, get a head count! Form up on the north wall! We establish a perimeter! Now! Go, go, go!" His orders were loud, by the book, and fundamentally wrong for the situation that was about to unfold. He was thinking like a conventional infantry leader, preparing for a direct assault. He was preparing for the last war, not the one that had just arrived at his doorstep. The students, caught up in his frantic energy, began to scramble, a disorganized flurry of motion and shouted questions. Chaos began to bloom. In the midst of this rising tide of panic, Rostova remained an anchor of impossible calm. The klaxon, the strobing lights, the shouts, they seemed to have no effect on her. While everyone else was reacting to the crisis, she was already processing it, analyzing it, and moving to her own silent internal rhythm. She took a single step back to her desk, her eyes scanning the room, not in panic, but in cold, swift assessment. She saw 23 terrified, highly trained marksmen and one loud, ineffective leader. She saw assets and liabilities. She turned and walked, not with the panicked rush of the others, but with a chilling, fluid purpose, toward the small, secondary office at the back of the classroom that housed the advanced communications gear and tactical maps. Her movement was a study in efficiency. She did not run, she glided, her boots barely seeming to touch the floor. She bypassed the standard-issue rifle rack and instead opened a large, unmarked Pelican case that had been sitting in the corner, ignored by everyone. Inside, nestled in high-density foam, was not a standard M40A6, but a highly customized experimental rifle system that none of the other Marines had ever seen before. Next to it was a suite of electronics, a ruggedized tablet, a satellite uplink, and a set of listening devices that looked like something out of a science fiction film. Thorne, finally noticing her divergent action, bellowed across the room. "Rostova! What in the hell do you think you're doing? I gave you an order! Get in formation!" She did not answer him. She did not even spare him a glance. She slung the exotic rifle over her shoulder, grabbed the tablet, and strode into the comms office as if she owned it. She closed the door behind her, plunging herself into a world of glowing screens and the crackle of a dozen different radio frequencies. The comms tech, a young lance corporal with terror in his eyes, looked up at her, utterly bewildered. "Ma'am, Sergeant, we're supposed to evacuate." Rostova placed the tablet on the central console and plugged it into the main uplink. Her fingers flew across the screen, her movements a blur of practiced speed. A series of complex satellite maps and data streams filled the display. "Negative, Corporal," she said, her voice dropping into a register of absolute, unquestionable command. It was the same low, steady voice, but now it was imbued with an authority that dwarfed Thorne's empty shouting. "We are not evacuating. We are the only asset. Give me control of the base-wide tactical net. Now." The corporal stared at her, his mouth agape. I can't do that. That requires command-level authorization." Rostova's head snapped up, and for the first time, her gray eyes held a flicker of something other than neutrality. It was not anger. It was an intensity so profound, so focused, that it felt like a physical force. "Corporal, my name is Chief Warrant Officer 5 Eva Rostova. My authorization code is Spectre 01 Alpha. You will grant me access to the tactical network, or I will have General Sterling personally see you court-martialed for dereliction of duty in a combat zone. We do not have time for a debate." The string of words, Chief Warrant Officer 5 Spectre General Sterling, was a foreign language of expertise and classification that short-circuited the young Marine's brain. He saw the look in her eyes, heard the certainty in her voice, and his training gave way to a deeper, more primal instinct. The instinct to obey someone who was clearly in command of not just the situation, but of reality itself. His hands, trembling, flew across his keyboard. A moment later, he nodded. "You're in, ma'am." "Good," Rostova said. She keyed the master transmit button. Her voice, calm and clinical, cut through the panicked chatter on every radio channel across the base. "All call signs, this is Spectre. Cease current maneuvers. I have the net. Stand by for instruction." The radio went dead silent. Out in the main classroom, Thorne, who had been trying to organize his students into a firing line, froze, the radio handset still pressed to his ear. He had heard that call sign before, in hushed whispers and classified briefings. Spectre. It wasn't a person. It was a myth. A ghost in the machine who directed the most secret and sensitive operations from the shadows. Rostova's voice came over the air again, a scalpel cutting through the chaos. "Watchtower, this is Spectre. I need a real-time satellite thermal overlay of Sector 4, focused on Grid 389er. Cross-reference with acoustic sensor data from arrays Delta and Echo. I am looking for a 6-man team, moving in a dispersed wedge formation. They will be using thermal baffling. Filter for Doppler-shifted heat signatures. A confused voice from the command center replied, Spectre, we don't have that capability. You do now, Rostova said calmly. I've just uploaded the software patch to your system from my terminal. Run it. On the large screen in the base's Tactical Operations Center, a new set of icons and filters suddenly appeared on their maps. The duty officer, a captain whose face was slick with sweat, stared in disbelief. Back in the comms office, the map on Rostova's tablet populated with data. 6 faint heat signatures, almost invisible against the background clutter, appeared, moving with terrifying speed and precision toward a high-security building on the edge of the base. Targets acquired, she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. She began to issue orders, not as suggestions, but as established facts. Sniper Elements 1 and 2, you are already in a masked position. Move 20 meters east to the secondary hide. You have a firing solution on Target Alpha and Target Bravo. Do not engage until I give the word. Sniper Element 3, you are compromised. Displace immediately to Grid 4-1-Charlie. You will provide overwatch on the southern approach. Acknowledge. 3 shaky acknowledge Spectre responses came back over the net. Thorne stood listening, his rifle hanging uselessly in his hand. The woman he had just publicly humiliated and dismissed was now orchestrating the entire base defense with a level of tactical brilliance he had never witnessed. She was playing 3-dimensional chess while he was still setting up the checkers board. She knew their positions, she knew the enemy's positions, and she was moving them all with the detached mastery of a grandmaster. They're trying to isolate the target building, Rostova said, speaking more to herself than to anyone else. Standard Spetsnaz protocol. 2 snipers for overwatch, 4-man team for the breach. Predictable. She zoomed in on the tactical map. Their snipers will be on that ridgeline. It's the only position that offers a clean shot. They feel safe there. She keyed her mic again. All stations, be advised. The target building is designated the package. General Sterling is en route with a high-value defector. The enemy team is here to assassinate him. We have approximately 90 seconds until the general's helicopter is on final approach. A wave of fresh panic washed over the radio net. General Sterling, a 4-star. The stakes had just gone from critical to catastrophic. Thorne, finally shaking himself out of his stupor, stormed into the comms office. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he demanded, his face a mask of confusion and wounded pride. "You can't just take over." Rostova didn't even turn to look at him. Her eyes were locked on the screen. "Gunnery Sergeant Thorne," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You have 2 choices. You can get out of my way, or you can be useful. Pick up that spotter scope. Get on the roof. I need you to give me a wind call for a 1,400-meter shot on a 45-degree declining angle. Can you do that? Or would you prefer to continue arguing about procedure while we lose a 4-star general?" The sheer, raw competence in her voice finally broke him. His ego, his pride, his entire worldview crumbled in that moment. He was a child in the presence of an adult. He stared at her for a second. Then, without a word, he grabbed the high-powered spotting scope from her gear case and ran out of the room, his face ashen. Rostova calmly picked up the handset for her own custom rifle. She walked to the doorway of the classroom, knelt, and deployed the rifle's bipod. She didn't need to go to the roof. She had already calculated the shot. She just needed Thorne out of her way and occupied with a task. Through the open hangar doors, she had a clear, if impossibly long, line of sight to the distant ridgeline. "Spectre to all sniper elements," she said into her throat mic, her eye already pressed against the optic. "On my mark, you will engage your designated targets. Fire on my shot." She took a slow, steady breath. The world outside her scope disappeared. There was only the target, a flicker of movement, a glint of light off an enemy optic. In her mind, she was no longer in the building. She was on the wind, traveling across the desert, feeling the subtle shifts in temperature and pressure. She was calculating spin drift, Coriolis effect, and the terminal ballistics of the tungsten core round in her chamber. Thorne's panicked voice came over the radio. "Wind is 7 miles per hour, gusting to 10, from 290. "Thank you, Gunny," Rostova murmured, though her mic was off. She had already calculated it at 8, gusting to 12. She adjusted her scope, her fingers moving by fractions of a millimeter. In the distance, she could hear the rhythmic whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of General Sterling's incoming Black Hawk helicopter. "Engaging," she said, her voice a whisper of finality. She didn't just squeeze the trigger. She became the trigger. Her heartbeat, her breath, the rifle, the bullet, and the target all became one synchronized system. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with a suppressed, heavy cough, a sound far quieter than the thunderous crack of the standard M40s. The bullet left the barrel, a tiny, invisible messenger of death on a journey that would take over 2 seconds to complete. She watched the vapor trail through her scope, a faint, shimmering line arcing across the vast expanse. It was perfect. A moment later, the enemy sniper on the ridgeline, the leader of the opposing force, ceased to exist. His body was thrown backward as if struck by a sledgehammer. "All elements, engage, engage, engage," she commanded. The desert erupted in a series of sharp, coordinated cracks as the other Marine snipers, guided by her hand, fired in unison. On her tablet, 4 more of the enemy signatures winked out of existence. The final member of the breach team, suddenly alone and exposed, broke cover and ran. A final shot from one of her teams dropped him in the dust. The entire engagement had lasted less than 10 seconds. Silence descended upon the desert, broken only by the approaching sound of the helicopter. The Black Hawk landed in a swirl of sand and rotor wash. The ramp dropped, and out strode a man who radiated an aura of command that made even Thorne look like a novice. General Sterling was tall and ramrod straight, his 4 stars glittering on his collar. He surveyed the scene, the neutralized threats, the perfectly positioned sniper teams, the sudden, eerie calm. His eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He was followed by a team of heavily armed security personnel who immediately fanned out, their weapons at the ready. Thorne ran up to him, snapping a salute. "General, situation secure, sir. We neutralized the threat." General Sterling's gaze passed right over Thorne as if he were a piece of furniture. His eyes scanned the assembled Marines, a question in them. He was looking for someone. His gaze swept past the hangar, and then it found her. Rostova had already broken down her rifle and was placing it back in its case. She stood up, brushing the dust from her knees, her face once again a mask of placid neutrality. She looked like a clerk who had just finished tidying up. The general's entire demeanor changed. The hard, commanding expression softened into one of profound respect and relief. He strode forward, his boots crunching on the sandy concrete, walking directly past the stunned and confused Gunnery Sergeant Thorne. He did not slow down until he was standing 3 feet in front of Rostova. Then, in front of every student, every instructor, and his own bewildered security detail, The four-star general snapped to the most rigid and perfect position of attention he had executed in 30 years. He brought his hand up in a salute so sharp it could have cut glass. "Ma'am," he said, his voice ringing with a deference that was utterly shocking. "Spectre is on station. Glad you could make the party." The word "ma'am" landed like a bomb, sending a shockwave of confusion through the onlookers. The salute from a four-star general to a sergeant was an inversion of the known universe. Gunnery Sergeant Thorne's jaw hung open, his face a perfect picture of catastrophic incomprehension. Rostova did not salute back. Her rank, her true station, did not require it. She simply gave him a small, tired nod. "General, you were 30 seconds early. Almost complicated things." Sterling allowed himself a thin smile. "My apologies, Chief. I'll try to be more considerate next time I'm being shot at." He lowered his salute and turned to the assembled crowd, his eyes finally landing on Thorne. The warmth was gone, replaced by a gaze as cold and hard as chipped ice. "Gunnery Sergeant," the general said, his voice dangerously low. "This is Chief Warrant Officer 5 Eva Rostova. She is not a student in your course. She is the architect of the entire Joint Special Operations Command Sniper program. She wrote the book on counter-sniper tactics that you are allegedly teaching. She was here, under my direct orders, to conduct a quiet, undercover audit of this school's antiquated curriculum. An audit, I see, that she has now completed." Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling Thorne's reality piece by piece. Chief Warrant Officer 5. The highest, most respected echelon of technical expertise, a rank so rare and specialized that most Marines went their entire careers without ever meeting one. And her call sign, Spectre. The legend was real, and he had tried to throw her out of his school. He had swept her gear onto the floor. The humiliation was so total, so absolute, that it was a physical force pressing the air from his lungs. He looked at Rostova, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the quietness not as weakness, but as discipline. He saw the stillness not as passivity, but as immense coiled strength. And then he saw her arm. She had rolled up her sleeves slightly while packing her gear. On the pale skin of her left forearm, just below the elbow, was a tattoo. It wasn't elaborate or colorful. It was a single, stark, black line of hash marks, tattooed with brutal simplicity. They were grouped in sets of 5. He counted 6 full sets, and then 3 more individual marks. 33. Thorne had seen tattoos like that before, in very dark corners of the military world. Each mark was a confirmed kill of a high-value target so significant, so classified, that the mission reports were sealed for 100 years. That tattoo was not a boast. It was a resume. It was a history of modern special warfare written on skin. His own paltry service record, of which he had been so proud, felt like a child's scribbling in comparison. After the general and his entourage had departed with the defector, a heavy, suffocating silence settled over the training area. The students, who had witnessed the entire saga, could not bring themselves to look at Thorne. They could only look at Rostova, their expressions a mixture of awe, terror, and a dawning, profound respect. The quiet sergeant they had dismissed was a living legend, a titan walking among them in borrowed clothing. Later that day, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the desert in hues of orange and purple, Rostova found Thorne sitting alone on a crate behind the classroom, his head in his hands. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out, his pride and certainty scooped out of him, leaving only a brittle shell. She did not approach him with anger or triumph, Her demeanor was as it had always been, calm, clinical, and direct. She stood before him, a shadow in the fading light. "Gunnery Sergeant," she began, her voice soft but firm. He looked up, his face etched with a shame so deep it was painful to behold. "Ma'am," he croaked, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. There are no words. I am prepared to accept my punishment." Rostova shook her head slightly. "This isn't about punishment. Punishment is easy. It's an ending. This is about education. Education is hard. It's a beginning." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Your failure today was not one of courage, Gunnery Sergeant. It was one of imagination. You saw a woman, so you perceived weakness. You heard quietness, so you assumed incompetence. Your prejudice is a tactical vulnerability. It's a blind spot that an enemy can and will exploit. Today, that blind spot almost cost a general his life. Tomorrow, it could cost us a war." She let that terrifying assessment hang in the air between them. "You don't need to be drummed out of the Corps. You have decades of valuable experience. But it's obsolete. You need an update. You need to learn to see the world as it is, not as you believe it ought to be." Thorne looked at her, his eyes pleading. "How?" "General Sterling has already approved my recommendation," she said, her voice flat and final. "Effective 0600 tomorrow, you are reassigned. You will be my new executive assistant for the JSOC Sniper Curriculum Rewrite Project. You will be attached to my command for the next 2 years. You will carry my rifle case. You will log my observation notes at every training facility from here to Afghanistan. You will sit in on my briefings. You will watch, you will listen, and you will learn what a 21st century warrior actually is. Your re-education begins at dawn." She turned and walked away, leaving him alone with the wreckage of his world and the terrifying, humbling prospect of his own salvation. The story of that day passed into the lore of the Marine Corps. It became a modern fable, a teaching tool told to every new class of snipers who walked through the doors of that school. The tale grew with each telling, as all legends do. Rostova's shot became longer, the number of enemies greater, the general's praise more effusive, but the core of the story, the essential truth of it, remained unchanged. It was a brutal lesson in humility. Years passed. The world turned. Gunnery Sergeant Rex Thorne eventually became Master Gunnery Sergeant Rex Thorne. He returned to the sniper school, not as a student, but as the master instructor, the most senior and respected figure in the entire program. He was a different man. The bluster was gone, replaced by a quiet, thoughtful authority. The arrogance had been burned out of him, leaving behind a core of hard-won wisdom. He stood before a new class of young, confident marksmen, men who looked just as he once had. They were full of swagger and unearned confidence. He let them settle. Then he began his opening lecture. "My name is Master Gunnery Sergeant Thorne," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble. "And the most important thing I am ever going to teach you is the story of my greatest failure." He told them everything. He told them about the quiet sergeant he had belittled, the legend he had tried to dismiss. He spared no detail of his own ignorance, his own prejudice, his own spectacular humiliation. He held his own failure up for them to see, not as a source of shame, but as a lesson paid for in blood and pride. When he was finished, the room was dead silent. The young Marines were no longer smirking. They were listening. Thorne pointed to a simple, framed plaque on the wall behind him. It was the only decoration in the entire room. On it were inscribed the words of Chief Warrant Officer 5 Eva Rostova. "The threat does not care about your opinion," he read aloud. "It does not care about your traditions, your feelings, or what you think a warrior should look like. It only cares about your competence." He looked out at the sea of young, humbled faces. "Your ego is a liability. Your assumptions are a weakness. Throw them away. Learn to see. Learn to listen. Because the most dangerous person on any battlefield is the one you never notice." Class dismissed. The lesson of Spectre and the Tyrant became more than just a story. It became a doctrine. It was a reminder, etched into the institutional soul of the community, that true strength is not loud. True authority is not taken. It is recognized. It is the quiet professional, the hidden master, who holds the true power. It is the one whose actions are their only argument, whose competence is their only creed. In a world obsessed with noise and appearance, it is a timeless and essential truth. Substance will always, in the end, triumph over style. And respect is a currency earned not in words, but in deeds.